There was, at the edge of the old town, a shop that no one could quite place on a map. Some swore it had always been there, a small house of faded wood and crooked windows, waiting quietly beneath the breath of dusk. Others claimed they'd never seen it until the evening they most needed it, as though the place had slid in from some gentler corner of the world. Its sign hung by a single brass chain, and moved with a sigh even when the air was still. Inside, they said, there were things that remembered you before you even stepped across the threshold. I want you to know something. Before we go further, we truly love and care for you here. Wherever you are, whatever weight you've been carrying, you're welcome in this story. You belong among its soft lanterns and calm voices. Before we begin the tale in earnest, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Take a breath, settle back, and let the quiet hold you. Now let's step inside together. On an evening brushed with lavender light, a small boy named Rowan wandered along the cobbled lane that led to the western hills. He had been chasing the sound of crickets, or perhaps only the thought of them, when he noticed a slant of gold spilling from a doorway that hadn't been there before. The door was slightly ajar, as if expecting him. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder at the empty path, then eased it wider. The air inside smelled of polished wood and soft dust, like the pages of an old book read too many times by someone who loved it. Shelves curved along the walls, holding curious things, seashells that shimmered faintly as though still holding the tide, tiny glass animals asleep in clusters, books that hummed in low, steady tones. At the far counter, a tall figure stood arranging a set of teacups on a silver tray. They looked up, smiled without showing teeth, and inclined their head in greeting. Rowan felt shy, but not afraid. The place was warm in a way that wasn't only about temperature, it was the warmth of someone saving a chair for you even before you arrived. He stepped closer, running a hand along a shelf. One jar held rainwater, labeled only with a date. Another displayed a single feather, pale blue and trembling as if from some bird that lived only in dreams. The keeper, whose age was impossible to guess, moved with deliberate calm. "You found us," they said, voice low and steady, like water over smooth stones. "Or perhaps we found you." They set down the last cup and gestured toward a small bell, resting on a square of velvet. Its glass surface caught the candlelight, scattering it into quiet stars across the counter. Rowan reached out, unsure if he was allowed to touch. The keeper nodded. The bell was cool beneath his fingers, lighter than he expected. When he tilted it, there was no sound, only a gentle thrum that seemed to bloom directly in his chest. A warmth spread up through his arms like the comfort of a memory he couldn't place. "It remembers," the keeper said. "Everything you leave behind, and everything you hope to find." They watched him carefully, not unkindly. "It doesn't ring in the way you think. It speaks in feelings." Rowan nodded, though he didn't quite understand. He turned the bell over in his palm. Its glass held a faint mist, shifting like breath against a window pane. He wondered if it could hold the laughter of his mother or the smell of rain before summer storms. He thought of quiet afternoons when his grandmother read aloud, her voice wrapping around each sentence like ribbon. The keeper poured tea into the waiting cups, the steam rising in slow curls. "Take this," they said, sliding one toward him. "Drink and listen." Rowan sipped carefully. The tea tasted of chamomile and something else, something like sunlight pressed into leaves. As he drank, the shop seemed to settle deeper into itself, as if drawing a long, contented breath. For a while they sat together without speaking. The only sounds were the faint ticking of a clock somewhere behind the shelves and the far-off murmur of the town preparing for night. Rowan felt a soft loosening inside, as if he'd stepped out of a hurried world into a room built for listening. Eventually he asked, "Why was the door open?" The keeper's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Because you were meant to walk through." They tapped a finger against the bell. "Sometimes, when a heart grows heavy with questions, a door will open. All you have to do is notice. Rowan turned the bell once more. Its mist cleared for an instant, revealing a pinprick of light deep within, like a tiny star caught mid-breath. He didn't know why, but he felt sure that whatever this was, it was meant for him. A quiet resolve nestled in his chest, the kind of promise you don't speak aloud but keep safe, like a seed waiting for spring. The evening darkened beyond the windows, and the candles cast their sleepy glow. Rowan set the bell gently back on the velvet, though part of him wanted never to let it go. The keeper placed a hand lightly over his, steady and reassuring. "Take it," they said. "Its song is faint now, but it will grow as you learn to hear it." Rowan slipped the bell into his pocket. It made no weight, only a soft awareness, as though a new room had opened inside him. He looked once more at the shelves, at the jars and feathers and books that seemed to be waiting for stories, then stepped toward the door. Outside, the sky had turned the color of ripened plums. Lamps flickered awake along the lane. Behind him, the shop sign gave a small sigh and swayed. He thought he heard a distant chime, or perhaps just the wind tracing its fingers along the brass chain. He walked home slowly, the bell warm against his palm, wondering what it might teach him, and how he would ever explain where he had been. Somewhere behind him, the shopkeeper blew out a candle, and the door closed with the gentlest click, as if sealing a promise meant only for him. That night, Rowan kept the little bell on his bedside table, where moonlight could lean across and touch it. He lay awake longer than usual, watching its pale shape in the dark. Every so often, he thought he heard a hush, like the soft rustle of a bird folding its wings. When sleep finally found him, it was deep and quiet, filled with a single dream. He was standing inside the shop again, only this time every object whispered his name, like the first drops of rain at the start of spring. Morning brought the smell of bread from the kitchen. His grandmother hummed an old tune as she set the loaf to cool. Rowan ate slowly, the bell hidden in his pocket. He wanted to tell her, but something about the memory felt too new, too fragile, as if speaking too soon might scatter it. He only smiled when she asked why he looked as though he'd swallowed sunlight. Later, he walked to the meadow behind their house. The grass was still damp from dawn, and clouds were stretched thin as pulled wool. He took the bell out, holding it to his ear. It made no sound, yet a feeling moved through him, gentle and patient, like a tide that would return no matter how far it drifted. He thought about the keeper's words. "Its song is faint now, but it will grow as you learn to hear it." All day he carried it, while gathering kindling, while tracing the shapes of birds against the sky, while sitting with a neighbor who told stories of his youth. Each time he felt a quiet assurance, as if the bell reminded him that everything around him was part of one wide listening. In the evening, Rowan went back to the lane where he'd first seen the shop. The stones were cool beneath his shoes, but where he expected the crooked door, there was only ivy against an old wall. He frowned, stepping closer, touching the bricks. Nothing stirred, the shop was gone, or hiding. He stood for a while, letting the dusk settle around him. Disappointment nipped at the edge of his chest, but behind it was calm, like knowing a friend was still nearby, even if you couldn't see them. He slipped the bell from his pocket and closed his eyes. A single warmth pulsed through it, soft as a heartbeat. The shop might be gone, but its welcome lingered. That night he dreamed again. The shelves bent in gentle curves, filled with feathers and glass jars. Somewhere a clock ticked with the patience of an old tree. The keeper stood near the counter, their hands folded loosely. "Listening is a kind of gift," they said, though their lips didn't seem to move. "Every kindness begins there." Rowan tried to speak, but the dream folded around him like a blanket, and he woke with the sense of having been taught something, though he couldn't name it. Days became weeks. Rowan learned to notice how the bell hummed when he showed someone a shortcut through the woods, or when he helped his grandmother knead dough. Its pulse was faint but steady, a thread weaving his small life together. He kept wondering when the shop might return, yet part of him understood that its timing wasn't his to choose. One afternoon, as he sat on the meadow hill, Mira appeared, a quiet girl from the village with a smile that often looked like she had just remembered something funny. She carried a small sketchbook and walked with her head tilted, as if listening for faraway music. They sat together watching clouds invent animals above them. Rowan almost told her about the bell, but decided for now to keep it close like a secret seed sprouting roots. When twilight came, he felt that same breath of possibility he'd felt the first night, and he thought perhaps the bell was teaching him patience, to wait, to watch, to let moments arrive without forcing them. The first rain of the season arrived in a hush, soft as brushing hands across a sleeping face. Rowan stood at the window, the bell cupped in both palms. Outside, drops gathered on the sill and slid down in silver trails. Each one carried the scent of far-off fields and the cool promise of rivers waking. He thought, without quite knowing why, that rain had a memory of its own. He decided to walk. The air felt like a song just beginning, and he wanted to hear the rest. He wandered through the lanes, past the baker's door, where warm bread sighed against the glass, past cottages with smoke curling like lazy ribbons. All the while the bell warmed against his skin, steady and light. At the bend, near the old sycamore, he saw Mira again. She was sketching the tree, raindrops clinging to her hair. She greeted him with a small wave, and he sat beside her, careful not to smudge the pages. Her drawings were soft charcoal shapes. The tree's limbs, a swallow in mid-dip, and a faint outline of something that looked like a door without walls. They watched the rain together. Mira spoke little, but her silence was friendly, not heavy. Rowan felt the bell shift slightly, as though it approved of the quiet they shared. He told her gently about the shop, the keeper, and the gift he had been given. Her eyes widened, not with disbelief, but with the kind of curiosity that lives in people who already believe in quiet miracles. "I'd like to see it," she said softly. "Maybe if we wait until evening." They stayed until the rain thinned, and a pale sunset brushed the rooftops. Then they walked toward the cobbled lane. The air smelled of wet stone and something sweeter, like honey warming in a jar. They reached the wall where the door had once been. The ivy shifted, a thread of gold trembled through the leaves. Mira caught her breath. Slowly, a seam appeared, and the shape of a doorway gathered itself from shadow and light. Rowan felt the bell hum in his pocket, a low, reassuring sound inside his bones. The door eased open a fraction, as if smiling. Together they stepped inside. The shop looked as it had before, yet also new. A candle burned near the window, casting a small island of glow. Shelves offered their peculiar treasures. A jar filled with echoes of lullabies, a stone that smelled faintly of cinnamon, a map drawn entirely of moonlight. The keeper turned from a stack of books, their expression calm, eyes carrying the kindness of a long memory. "You brought a friend," they said, voice warm enough to steady the rain still clinging to Rowan's coat. "Good. Some doors prefer more than one heart." Mira wandered slowly among the shelves, fingertips hovering above the objects, not quite touching. She seemed to know not to speak loudly here, as though the shop itself was listening. Rowan felt proud, though he wasn't sure why, perhaps because the place had welcomed her too. The keeper led Rowan to the counter. "How does it sing for you?" they asked, nodding toward the bell. Rowan placed it gently on the wood. The glass was clearer now, the mist inside arranged in a faint spiral, as if gathering stories. "It hums when I do kind things," he said. "Or when something feels true." "That's its nature," the keeper replied. "It answers the quiet part of the heart. Keep tending it, and it will teach you how to tend others." Mira joined them, eyes bright. "Does it have a name?" she asked. The keeper smiled a little. Its name is not a sound, it is a way of being present. One day you may understand. They poured tea for the three of them, fragrant with mint and something older. As they drank, the shop settled deeper, as though walls and shelves leaned in to listen. Outside, the last threads of rain gleamed in the lantern light. When it was time to leave, the keeper wrapped the bell in a square of soft cloth and handed it back to Rowan. "Take care of it, and it will take care of you," they said. Rowan and Mira stepped into the fresh night. The door closed gently behind them, and with a blink it was only ivy and stone again. They exchanged a look, smiling without words. The lane was wet and shining, the sky stitched with the first stars. Walking home side by side, Rowan felt a calmness settle inside him. The bell's warmth was steady against his chest. He sensed that this was only the beginning of something that would grow slowly, like rain coaxing roots to deepen. The thought made him glad, and for a moment he imagined the whole village asleep, dreaming of bells that remembered, doors that listened, and friends who shared quiet discoveries under a patient sky. The days after the rain felt washed clean, as if the sky had been gently wrung out and hung to dry. Rowan carried the bell everywhere, sometimes tucked against his palm, sometimes hidden in the small pocket of his satchel. Its steady warmth became as familiar as the rhythm of his own breath. He began to notice how people softened when they spoke to him, how their shoulders eased, how their eyes cleared for a heartbeat before they returned to their thoughts. He wondered if it was the bell or something inside himself slowly learning to listen. Mira often joined him in the meadow. They would sit among the tall grass, trading stories about birds that built nests from scraps of song, or clouds that sailed at night, carrying small lanterns for wandering dreams. Sometimes she drew quick charcoal lines that caught the curl of a stem or the gentle bend of Rowan's hair in the wind. He liked watching her draw. It was as though she was tracing the quiet inside everything. One afternoon they decided to walk farther than usual, past the bend of the river, where the trees grew close together. The air smelled of damp leaves and early blossoms. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in soft patches, landing on their faces like warm coins. They followed a narrow track until it opened into a clearing where an old wooden bench waited beneath a leaning oak. Its surface was carved with names and initials, some blurred by years of rain. Rowan sat and placed the bell on the bench between them. Its glass caught a shimmer of gold from the afternoon light. He turned it slowly, watching the faint spiral inside. "Do you think," he asked quietly, "that it knows who once owned it, or who might need it next?" Mira tilted her head. "Maybe it doesn't keep things the way we do. Maybe it carries feelings instead of people." She brushed a thumb across the bell's curve without lifting it. "Like how music stays in your chest after the song is gone." They stayed there until the light grew longer and the air cooled. Birds called from the branches, short sleepy notes. Rowan felt a calm curiosity, as though the day were leading them somewhere but not hurrying them to arrive. When they rose to leave, he tucked the bell back into its cloth, holding it gently. That evening, Rowan returned home to find his grandmother sitting by the window, mending a shirt. She looked up and smiled, but there was a shadow in her eyes, something tired and distant. He sat beside her, offering to thread the needle. She let him, her hands resting on the fabric. They worked together in companionable silence. He thought of telling her about the shop and the keeper, yet a voice inside suggested waiting. Some stories, like seeds, bloom best when the air is right. As dusk deepened, a breeze slipped through the window, stirring the curtains. The bell gave a faint pulse from his pocket, a heartbeat against his leg. Rowan looked toward the horizon, where a faint shimmer hovered just above the fields, too soft for anyone else to notice. He felt the invitation of it, but also a sense that tonight was not for doors or lanterns. It was for sitting quietly beside someone who had given him years of steady love. Later, as he prepared for bed, He set the bell on the table again. Moonlight stretched across its surface, drawing silver veins inside the glass. He leaned close, whispering thank you, unsure if he meant the bell, the shop, or simply the day. Sleep came soon after, smooth and heavy, and in his dreams he heard voices murmuring in a language made entirely of comfort. Morning arrived bright and cool. Rowan and Mira planned to visit the far orchard, where wild pears sometimes grew among the branches of older trees. The path wound through rolling hills and fields dotted with yellow flowers. The bell sat secure in Rowan's satchel, humming softly with each step, like a companion keeping pace. At the orchard, sunlight spilled in wide patches between the boughs. They tasted fruit, still warm from the sun, laughing when juice ran down their wrists. Mira found a cluster of blossoms shaped like small stars, and they wove them into a crown. She placed it on Rowan's head with mock ceremony, and for a moment he felt like a prince in a story whispered only at night. The bell warmed, faint but certain, as though pleased. They lingered there, talking about things that had no urgency. The smell of new rain, the strange way cats seemed to understand secrets, the way certain memories arrive without warning, soft as a feather brushing a cheek. Rowan thought about how different this companionship felt, unhurried, rooted in a shared quiet rather than noisy declarations. On the way back, they passed an elderly man trying to lift a basket heavy with apples. Rowan offered to help. Together, he and Mira carried it to the man's cottage. He thanked them, eyes crinkling with relief. As they left, Rowan felt the bell give a gentle warmth that spread through his chest, a reminder that kindness was not a grand performance, but a steady flame. That night, after the village had gone still, Rowan sat by his window. Stars lay scattered across the sky like crumbs of light. He held the bell and let its silence fill him. Somewhere just out of sight, the shop waited. He could almost sense the keeper moving about, arranging teacups, perhaps lighting a candle against the dark. The thought made him smile. He set the bell back on the sill, its glass glimmering faintly. A breeze passed through, cool and fragrant with meadow grass. Rowan leaned against the wall, eyelids heavy, and let himself drift towards sleep. As he slipped into dreaming, it seemed the bell gave a tiny sigh, or Perrin woke to a morning the color of fresh cream, soft lights slipping between the curtains. The bell sat on the sill, its glass pearled with a thin mist that looked almost like breath. He held it for a moment before slipping it into his satchel, knowing without quite knowing that today would need its quiet company. Mira met him near the river, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She unrolled it to reveal warm bread and a pot of berry jam, the kind that left purple stains on the tongue. They ate sitting on a flat stone while the river moved past in silver ripples. Above them, swifts arced like bits of soot caught in sunlight. After breakfast, they followed the water upstream. The banks narrowed, and wildflowers leaned toward the current as though listening. Rowan felt the bell hum gently whenever they paused to watch a bird or skip a stone. It seemed to like their pauses more than their walking. Eventually they reached a place neither had seen before, a hollow where the river slowed and spread into a shallow pool. Willow branches trailed the surface, drawing rings across the clear water. Rowan crouched, noticing smooth stones scattered like a hidden alphabet. Mira knelt beside him, sketching the way the light scattered through leaves and spilled across their faces. They spent hours there, talking in unhurried threads. Mira shared that she often drew because some feelings were too soft for words. Rowan understood. The bell inside his pocket felt like one of those quiet thoughts you hold without needing to name. When the sun began to tilt westward, a breeze stirred the willows. Rowan heard something faint, a breath within the leaves. He looked at Mira, but she seemed not to hear. He placed the bell against his palm, and for an instant the sound deepened, like a chord at the center of the air. It left behind a sense of promise, though of what he couldn't say. They returned as dusk settled. Walking slowly through the meadow, fireflies flickered in small lantern pulses. At the edge of the village, Mira paused, resting her hand lightly on Rowan's shoulder. "That place by the river," she said, felt as if it had been waiting. He nodded. The bell gave one small warmth, as though agreeing. At home, Rowan's grandmother was darning socks by the hearth. She looked up, eyes bright in the lamplight. "You seem lighter," she observed. Rowan smiled, unable to explain except by sitting near her with quiet contentment. The room smelled of wool and bread, and the night settled outside, untroubled and whole. Perhaps it was only the night reminding him that he was exactly where he belonged. A mist lay over the fields. The next morning, softening fences and blurring the far trees into pale silhouettes. Rowan walked carefully along the path, shoes damp from dew. The bell rested against his heart, steady as a breath. Each time he glanced at it, the faint spiral inside seemed to turn, though perhaps it was only the way light slipped across glass. He met Mira at the orchard. She had brought a small wooden flute and was coaxing gentle notes from it, slow, rounded phrases that seemed to open the air. Rowan listened, letting the tune soak into him. He thought of how the keeper had said the bell answered the quiet part of the heart. Perhaps music was a language it understood. They wandered deeper among the trees, collecting fallen pears. An old ladder leaned against a trunk, and they took turns climbing to reach fruit hidden among the highest leaves. The afternoon smelled of sap and sun-warred skin. Time loosened its hold, becoming more like water than hours. As they rested under a tree, Mira spoke softly about her mother, who painted once but had stopped after illness had dimmed her strength. She wished she could give her mother back a sense of color. Rowan listened, careful not to fill the silence with clumsy words. The bell warmed faintly, reminding him that sometimes kindness was simply holding space for someone's story. A movement caught his eye, a fox standing at the orchard's edge. Its coat glowed red against the pale grass. It watched them calmly, head tilted as if considering an invitation. Then, with one fluid step, it turned and slipped between trees. Rowan felt a thread of wonder tug at him, light but certain. They followed slowly, keeping to the narrow trail. Beyond the orchard they came upon an old garden wall, half collapsed and laced with ivy. An archway opened in the center, and within it hung a shimmer of air, faint as moonlight on water. Rowan sensed the shop's nearness, the way the world grew expectant just before its doors appeared. But today the arch remained only stone and shadow. The bell gave a quiet warmth, not disappointment but reassurance, as if reminding him that some doors bloom only when hearts are steady enough to receive what waits inside. They turned back toward the village, content to leave the mystery sleeping. Evening drew a soft shawl across the fields. Rowan returned home to find his grandmother tending a pot of stew. She looked tired, but smiled when she saw him. They ate together at the table, the bell resting nearby like an extra guest. He told her about pears and foxes and music. She listened, eyes crinkling, her spoon pausing now and then as though catching a fragrance of her own long-ago adventures. Later, as Rowan prepared for bed, he placed the bell near the window where stars could lean close. He felt the hush of the house around him, a quiet that wasn't empty but full of held breath. He drifted into sleep with the sense that the shop, somewhere out in the night, was pleased with how gently he was learning to walk through the world. Morning light spilled like honey across the floorboards, slow and forgiving. Rowan woke with the sense of a message waiting just beyond hearing. The bell glowed faintly where it rested by the window. Mist caught inside its glass as though it had gathered dreams while he slept. He slipped it into his pocket and stepped out into the still air. The village felt different at dawn, as though the houses themselves were stretching awake. Smoke lifted in threads from chimneys, and the smell of baking bread drifted through an open door. Rowan walked toward the common green where Mira was sketching a clump of late-blooming heather. She waved, her pencil smudged with lavender dust. They decided to wander beyond the hill path, where neither had gone before. The way climbed gently, bordered by low hedges thick with berries. Sheep grazed on the slope, their coats soft against the bracken. A breeze set the grasses swaying in long green sighs. At the top, the world open. Below lay the river, silver in the new light, and farther still, the forest stretched in layered blues. Rowan felt a pulse from the bell, not a sound exactly, more like a breath brushing against the edges of his heart. Mira noticed his pause and asked what he heard. He only smiled, unsure how to give the feeling words. They sat on a flat stone and shared apples from her satchel. The view made everything seem both fragile and enduring, like a painting that might change if you blinked. Mira spoke of her hope to hold an exhibition of her drawings one day, not for praise, but so others might see the quiet corners of the world that often go unnoticed. Rowan listened, knowing he would stand beside her if ever that moment came. A sudden flutter drew their eyes to a kestrel hovering in the pale sky. It dipped, then vanished into the trees below. Rowan felt the day had offered them a blessing, a small seal upon their companionship. As they descended, he kept one hand lightly over the bell, warmed by the simple certainty of belonging. That evening he sat with his grandmother as she told an old story about a wanderer who could hear the songs of stones. Her voice was slow and weathered, and Rowan imagined the stones singing beneath their cottage law. When she finished, they sat quietly while rain began to tap. A rain lingered through the night and left the morning fresh, smelling of damp leaves. Rowan walked with Mira to the meadow, where droplets hung like clear beads from every stem. The bell lay against his chest, cool but alive, as though it too tasted the wet air. They crossed the meadow to the stream and followed its winding through low hills. The water was swift from the rain, and tiny whirlpools curled around stones. Mira crouched to watch the eddies while Rowan leaned on a fallen branch, content to listen to the hush of flowing water. Farther on, they found a wooden footbridge, slick with moss. Beyond it stood a stand of birch trees, their white trunks bright against dark soil. As Rowan stepped onto the bridge, the bell trembled slightly, catching an unseen current. He paused, scanning the forest. For an instant he thought he saw the faint outline of a doorway among the birches, like mist shaped into an arch. He blinked, and the vision was gone, leaving only dripping branches. They explored the grove anyway, moving slowly so as not to disturb the hush. Birds shifted high above, scattering drops from the leaves. Mira began to sketch the shapes of the trunks, capturing their then grace. Rowan traced circles in the damp earth with a stick, letting thoughts settle like sediment in clear water. When they returned to the bridge, the clouds had thinned, revealing pale sunlight. The bell felt warmer, as though pleased they had taken time to notice what might have slipped away unnoticed. They lingered, letting the quiet mend something small inside them that had been frayed by hurried days. Back in the village, Rowan helped his grandmother gather herbs for drying. They tied neat bundles to hang above the hearth, filling the room with the scent of rosemary and thyme. As dusk came, he set the bell near the herbs where its soft gleam caught the last firelight. The house felt layered with calm, rain drying from the thatch, herbs perfuming the air, stories resting in the walls. That night, Rowan dreamt of walking through birches lit from within, their bark shining like moonlit paper. Somewhere a voice told him to keep his steps light, for the forest remembered kindness. He woke with the echo still gentle in his chest, then at the roof, steady and patient. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a change from the grey of days past. Rowan set out early, drawn by a restlessness he couldn't quite name. The bell felt eager too, as if waiting for an invitation. He met Mira by the mill pond, where dragonflies darted across the surface like quick thoughts. Together they followed the path toward the old quarry. Grass now softened the stone edges, and a pool of rainwater lay at the bottom. mirror smooth. Rowan knelt to look, finding sky and trees reflected upside down. For a moment he felt suspended between two worlds. They wandered along the rim, gathering wild mint that grew in sheltered cracks. Mira tucked sprigs into her sketchbook, saying the scent helped her remember places. Rowan slipped a leaf into the bell's loop, watching it sway like a small flag of green. Past the quarry they discovered a ruined cottage, its roof caved but walls still holding firm. Ivy draped the stones, and a single rosebush had somehow survived in the yard, offering late blossoms. Rowan felt drawn inside, stepping carefully over fallen beams. Sunlight spilled through gaps, touching dust motes until they looked like golden snow. In a corner stood an old chair, surprisingly steady. Rowan sat while Mira explored, her footsteps soft against the uneven floor. He felt the hush deepen, and the bell stirred, a muted chime, though no hand had moved it. It was as if the cottage held memories, and the bell translated them into a language beyond sound. They left a small offering on the windowsill, one rose petal, and a scrap of Mira's sketching paper, folded into a bird. Walking back, they spoke little, letting the day arrange itself quietly inside them. That evening, Rowan helped his grandmother light lanterns for the lane outside their home. The glow pooled warmly against the coming dark. She told him she had dreamed of his grandfather smiling among fields of wheat, and she believed such dreams were gentle messages from beyond the edge of waking. Rowan listened, touched by how naturally she welcomed wonder into ordinary life. Before sleep, he held the bell, thinking of the cottage and its calm endurance. He felt certain the shopkeeper's gift was teaching him to notice where stories linger, waiting for a listening heart. He drifted into slumber with a sense of gratitude, steady as the bell's unspoken song. The morning stretched soft and pale, the sunlight slipping like silk across the rooftops. Rowan held the bell loosely in his hands as he stepped outside, listening to the faint hum that had grown steadier over time. It was as if it had become part of him, a quiet companion that breathed with his own heart. Mira waited by the orchard gate, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. They walked together toward the far fields, the wind carrying the scent of grass and the distant river. Rowan thought of the shop, wondering if it had noticed how gently he was learning to move through the world. The thought made him smile, a slow, quiet smile that seemed to spread through his chest. They reached the hillside where the wildflowers grew thick, swaying in muted colors. Rowan knelt to examine a cluster of small white blooms, noticing how the petals trembled even without a breeze. He pressed a flower between his fingers and felt the bell pulse faintly as though acknowledging the small act of care. Mira crouched beside him, sketching the flowers with lines so light they almost seemed to float above the page. Time passed without words. The meadow seemed to exist for them alone, each sigh of wind a gentle punctuation, each bird call a soft comment. Rowan thought of the keeper's words. Its song is faint now, but it will grow as you learn to hear it. The bell now hummed with a certainty he had not felt before, as if the world was teaching him its quiet language. They wandered down toward the river, where a small family of ducks paddled in the shallow water. Rowan watched them for a while, feeling the rhythm of their movements settle inside him. Mira laughed quietly when one duck shook its feathers and sent droplets across the grass. And Rowan felt a warmth in the bell that mirrored her laughter. It was a soundless music, a harmony of simple joy. As the sun tipped toward evening, they returned to the village. Rowan's grandmother was in the garden, tying bundles of herbs. She smiled at them, the lines on her face softening in the lantern light. Rowan offered her a wild flower, and she accepted it with a nod of quiet understanding. It felt like a gesture larger than its size, and the bell pulsed in agreement. Night came with a cool hush. Rowan sat by the window, bell in hand, listening to the stars settle overhead. Somewhere out in the still dark, the shop waited. Its doors might open for another traveler or for him again, but for now it was enough to feel its presence, steady and patient. Sleep arrived slowly, wrapped in the kind of quiet that teaches without urgency, the bell's soft warmth lingering as he drifted. The dawn brought a gentle wind, carrying the scent of rain from distant hills. Rowan felt a new kind of anticipation as he adjusted the bell in his pocket. Today he would explore further along the river path, a place he and Mira had only glimpsed before. The bell throbbed faintly, a reminder that he was never truly alone in his steps. Mira met him at the bend, her hair catching the first light. They walked together without speaking, letting the morning fill the space between them. Birds rose from the trees, their wings cutting through the air with silent grace. Rowan thought of the shopkeeper's quiet smile, imagining that somewhere in the world they too listened to such moments. They followed the river past shallow pools where frogs croaked a low greeting. Rowan paused at each, running a finger across the water's surface, feeling the bell hum in response. Mira collected small stones and pressed them into the dirt as if leaving a mark for future wanderers. The two of them moved in a rhythm both quiet and certain, a dialogue spoken in gestures rather than words. At a curve in the river, Rowan noticed something unusual, a narrow trail leading toward a small copse of trees, faint and almost hidden. They followed it, the air cooler beneath the shade. The trees leaned in close, their branches forming gentle arches overhead. Rowan felt the bell pulse warmly, a signal that they were exactly where they were meant to be. Inside the copse, they found an old wooden bench, carved with letters worn smooth by years of wind and rain. Rowan traced them with his fingers, feeling the history of names that had long been forgotten. Mira sketched the bench, and the shadows dancing on the mossy ground. They left a small gift, a handful of flowers from the meadow, tucked beneath a stone. It felt like a tiny act of reverence, and the bell responded with its faint, contented warmth. They returned through the village as dusk softened the rooftops. Rowan's grandmother had prepared a simple supper, her hands steady despite the day's chores. Rowan told her about the hidden path and the bench, and she nodded, her eyes reflecting both pride and quiet wonder. Rowan felt the bell hum again, affirming that small gestures like noticing a hidden trail or leaving a flower held as much meaning as grand events. That night, Rowan placed the bell on the sill beside him. The moon shone pale, and the stars were steady in their silver arcs. He imagined the shop, the keeper arranging teacups and listening, knowing he had grown a little more attuned to the world's quiet rhythms. Sleep embraced him slowly, carrying him into dreams of soft light and gentle voices that spoke without words. The morning was soft, with sunlight falling in golden sheets across the village. Rowan felt a lightness as he tucked the bell into his pocket, its faint pulse steady against his side. Today, they would visit the orchard beyond the far hill, a place that had become a sanctuary over the weeks. Mira joined him at the edge of the meadow. Together they walked, the bell humming gently as they followed the path where wildflowers leaned toward the sun. The orchard was alive with bees and the scent of ripening fruit. Rowan felt a hush settle over him as they moved among the trees, sunlight catching the leaves in delicate patterns. They paused at a particular tree, its branches low and heavy with late blossoms. Rowan picked one carefully and placed it inside the bell's loop, as if gifting it something alive. Mira watched, X-book open, capturing the scene with light, precise strokes. They spent the afternoon tending to the orchard in small ways, clearing fallen branches, gathering fruit, and leaving tiny offerings for the earth. Rowan felt a satisfaction that was quiet but deep, the kind that made him understand the rhythm of care. As the sun tipped westward, the sky painted itself in pale amber. Rowan noticed a fox watching from the edge of the orchard. Its gaze was steady, calm, as if it had been observing their small acts of attention all afternoon. The bell pulsed faintly warm, like a whispered acknowledgement. Mira smiled at him, eyes reflecting the soft light, and they returned home slowly, letting the orchard fade behind them in peace. Evening brought a cool wind. Rowan's grandmother waited by the hearth, her hands moving in the familiar rhythm of sewing. He placed the bell nearby, feeling its warmth seep into the quiet room. They ate together in calm, sharing stories and laughter that drifted like soft music. The day seemed to stretch gently, each moment holding its own small wonder. When Rowan prepared for bed, he held the bell one last time, feeling the spiral inside glow faintly in the moonlight. He thought of the shop, the keeper, the small lessons of kindness and presence that had grown slowly over weeks. Somewhere, out in the quiet dark, the shop waited, the bell hummed, a soft acknowledgement, and Rowan let himself drift into sleep, carried by the calm rhythm of all he had learned. The morning came soft and pale, with clouds drifting slowly across the sky like silent messengers. Rowan awoke with the bell resting against his chest, its warmth gentle, reassuring, as though it had been waiting for him to notice. He held it for a long moment, letting its quiet pulse sink into him before slipping it carefully into his satchel. Mira met him by the edge of the meadow. Together they walked toward the hill where the orchard stretched beyond the far fields. The air smelled faintly of earth and flowers, carrying with it the memory of rain and sun mingled over days past. Rowan thought about how far they had wandered since that first day, how small acts, gathering fruit, noticing a hidden path, leaving a flower for someone unseen, had shaped the rhythm of his life. At the orchard, they found the late blossoms leaning gently toward the sun. Rowan knelt to examine a single flower, tracing the curve of its petals. The bell hummed faintly, warm against his palm, as though acknowledging his attention. Mira sketched quietly beside him, her pencil strokes light, capturing both the scene and the calm that had settled between them. They wandered farther, to the edge of the orchard, where a small stone wall stood. Rowan ran his fingers along the rough surface, feeling the cool weight of history beneath his touch. Mira rested her hand on the wall beside his, sharing the quiet without needing to speak. Rowan noticed the gentle sway of the trees, the whisper of wind through branches, and the subtle, steady warmth of the bell. He understood, in that moment, that this kind of presence was its own reward. As the afternoon waned, they paused at a hollow beneath the largest tree, its roots like folded arms. Rowan placed the bell there, letting the warmth settle into the soil. He imagined it sharing its song with the earth, listening to roots and stones and the memory of the orchard. Mira sat beside him, sketching the roots and the soft shadows they cast. Time seemed to fold in around them, slow and kind, carrying the sense that nothing truly precious is hurried. Evening approached with a gentle hush. Rowan and Mira walked home slowly, feeling the land breathe beneath their feet. Lanterns glowed faintly in the village as they passed, and the scent of bread and herbs drifted through the streets. Rowan felt a quiet joy in the familiarity of this world, and the bell hummed faintly in response, as if it recognized the gentle rhythm of gratitude in his heart. Back home, Rowan's grandmother was tending her garden, a single lantern swinging in the wind. She looked up, eyes bright with recognition and care, and nodded when Rowan greeted her. They shared a small supper together, quiet and slow, filled with the comfort of routine and presence. Rowan felt the weight of the day settle softly into him, each small act of observation, kindness, and listening layering into a calm certainty. Later, Rowan placed the bell on the windowsill. Moonlight streamed across the glass, illuminating the spiral within. He leaned close, feeling its pulse echo through him, carrying a sense of completion and continuity. Somewhere beyond the edges of the village, the shop waited, patient and knowing, and Rowan felt that his journey, though winding and small, had always been guided by its quiet wisdom. He lay back against his pillow, listening to the night breathe around the house. The stars were steady above, sprinkled across the sky like quiet lanterns. The bell's warmth lingered, a reminder that he had learned the value of noticing, of patience, and of shared presence. Sleep arrived gently, carrying him into dreams where orchards shimmered, trees bent in acknowledgement, and laughter, soft and bright, circled in harmony with the pulse of the bell. And somewhere he knew he had become part of a story larger than himself, one that moved quietly through the world, waiting only for hearts that could listen. The morning unfolded like a slow song, soft and steady, with sunlight spilling through the leaves in quiet streaks. Rowan rose with the bell resting near his heart, its warmth familiar as breathing. He held it for a moment, feeling its gentle pulse, then tucked it carefully into his satchel. Today, he sensed, was meant for reflection rather than discovery. He wandered through the meadow alone at first, letting the grass bend underfoot and the wind carry the small movements of the day. Every blade, every flower seemed to lean toward him with a quiet recognition. Rowan felt the hum of the bell grow steady and deep, as if it were not simply a companion, but a mirror of all he had come to understand: patience, presence, and the delicate thread of care that connected every small act. Mira joined him under the old oak at the meadow's edge. They shared a silence that was neither empty nor forced. It held the weight of everything they had seen, learned, and become. Rowan reached into his pocket, feeling the bell respond to the stillness warming in his hand. Mira smiled faintly, sketching the curve of the oak's roots, the way shadows lay in gentle arcs across the grass. Rowan understood, without words, that this was a language of its own, one they had learned together. They walked slowly to the orchard, where sunlight caught the late blossoms and made them shine like whispers. Rowan knelt to gather a small cluster of flowers, letting the bell rest on the ground while he arranged them carefully. Mira watched him, her pencil hovering, capturing the quiet intimacy of the gesture. Time seemed to pause, as though the orchard itself recognized the accumulation of gentle days, the moments of noticing that had formed a life both simple and profound. As dusk approached, Rowan returned to the village. Lanterns glowed softly, the streets humming with the small, contained rhythms of domestic life. He paused by his grandmother's garden, the scent of herbs and earth rising in a warm tide. She looked up and nodded, the lines of her face softened by familiarity and care. They shared no words beyond what was necessary. The comfort of presence had grown larger than conversation. Rowan felt the bell hum faintly in his pocket, a gentle acknowledgement of continuity, of a life stitched together by attention and kindness. That night, Rowan placed the bell on the windowsill. Moonlight filtered through, drawing silver spirals inside the glass. He leaned close, whispering a quiet gratitude, unsure whether he addressed the bell, the shop, or the world itself. Somewhere beyond the night, he imagined the shopkeeper arranging teacups, listening, patient and steady. Rowan understood at last that the journey had never been about doors or destinations, but about learning to move with gentleness and awareness, to notice and to respond with heart. He lay back, feeling the night settle around him, listening to the stars like distant lanterns, steady and patient. The bell's warmth lingered, echoing the quiet rhythm of all the days, the rivers, the orchards, the meadows, the small acts of care he and Mira had shared. Rowan felt a completeness that was not an ending but a sigh, a gentle exhale that carried the sense of having walked alongside life itself. And somewhere beyond sight or knowing, the shop waited. Perhaps it would open again for him, perhaps for someone else. But for now, it was enough to know that the world held its quiet magic in places that bend toward kindness, patience, and presence. Rowan closed his eyes, letting sleep come without hurry, without need, carried by the rhythm of all he had learned and shared. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man.
And with that he stretched into the stars,